The U.S. is facing rising consumer prices and supply chain problems. Americans are seeing increasing costs for food, energy, and housing.
In early 2025, bold promises echoed out of Washington. The U.S. would become self-reliant, free from dependence on foreign supply chains. But as the months passed, reality told a different story. A sweeping new executive order rolled back many recent trade barriers, removing tariffs on key imports like nickel, graphite, and pharmaceuticals. This decision highlighted a crucial truth. American industry, no matter how ambitious, isn't yet capable of carrying the full weight of essential supply chains alone. For the automotive industry, this move was a lifeline, the difference between keeping assembly lines running and shutting them down. The key questions now are, which industries stand to benefit most from this policy shift? And could the easing of tariffs trigger price volatility or reshape global trade dynamics? One thing is clear. This pivot marks a stark departure from the administration's earlier commitment to full economic self-sufficiency. The new executive order slashed tariffs on over 45 strategic goods, everything from raw metals like nickel and gold to compounds used in pharmaceuticals, high-tech magnets, and LED lights crucial to clean energy initiatives. In doing so, the White House acknowledged what many already suspected. Domestic production can't yet meet the complex demands of a modern economy. But that doesn't mean the benefits will be evenly shared. These tariff exemptions are being used as leverage, granted only to trade partners willing to make concessions in bilateral deals. For the auto industry, deeply dependent on global supply chains, the stakes couldn't be higher. Their survival now hinges on how well their respective governments negotiate within this new trade framework. The abrupt shift in policy has exposed the gap between political rhetoric and industrial reality, raising a bigger question: how dependent is the US on the rest of the world? At the core of this policy, reversal lies a simple, unavoidable fact. The US consumes more raw materials than it can produce. Minerals, metals, and chemical compounds are the bedrock of every modern industry. And the auto sector makes this imbalance especially clear. Electric vehicles, often hailed as the future of transportation, require large amounts of materials like graphite and nickel. But in 2024, the US didn't produce a single ton of natural graphite, despite consuming more than 52,000 tons. Every bit had to be imported, mostly processed in China, which controls over 90% of the world's refining capacity. Even when the raw material comes from friendly nations, it often passes through China before reaching American factories. Nickel presents a similar challenge. In Michigan, only one small mine remains operational, with minimal output. Recycling helps, but only goes so far. Most of the raw supply comes from allies like Canada and Australia. Yet refining is still concentrated overseas. This story repeats itself across other key materials: aluminum, gold, and more. American smelting and mining infrastructure simply can't keep pace with demand, forcing the country to import heavily from places like Brazil and Jamaica. For automakers, these raw material shortages have become a persistent crisis. Costs swing unpredictably, production schedules are disrupted, and uncertainty is the new normal. Adjusting tariff policy helps, but doesn't eliminate the underlying dependency, a vulnerability that no amount of protectionism can fix. Cars are particularly complex products. A single vehicle requires thousands of parts, many of which cross borders multiple times before ending up in showrooms. Every time a new tariff is introduced, production costs climb. In 2025 alone, import tariffs on vehicles rose by 25%, and materials like steel and aluminum were hit with duties as high as 50%. Experts estimate these tariffs will add around $18 billion in extra costs for US automakers this year. For consumers, that translates to roughly $5,000 more for a domestically produced car and over $8,500 more for imported models, costs that many manufacturers simply can't absorb. To keep cars affordable, companies are cutting profits, absorbing some of the increased costs themselves, or renegotiating contracts to hide price hikes. But these workarounds aren't sustainable. Electric and luxury vehicles, which rely heavily on imported components, are likely to be the first hit by these rising costs. Inside corporate boardrooms, opinions are split. Some view the tariff exemptions as a short-term fix. Others argue that constant policy changes are more damaging than the tariffs themselves. What's clear is that US trade policy now has immediate global consequences, determining who gains and who loses in the race for exemptions. Much depends on which countries Washington chooses to favor. The executive order made it clear, tariff relief will only go to nations that offer something in return. This approach has triggered a global scramble, with governments racing to strike favorable deals to protect their domestic industries. Europe and Japan moved quickly, securing agreements that brought car tariffs down to about 15%. South Korea followed, agreeing to increase its investments in the US in exchange for reduced duties. India, previously hit with tariffs of up to 50% due to oil deals with Russia, is now negotiating to cut that rate to 10 to 15%. Even Taiwan, still facing a 20% tariff, has reported progress in its talks. Taken together, these deals are redrawing the competitive landscape. Automakers whose governments secure favorable terms now enjoy a clear edge. Those left out must bear the weight of higher costs and reduced market share. This growing imbalance has thrown long-term industry planning into disarray. Building cars isn't something that can be done overnight. It takes years of planning and preparation. But with trade policies and tariffs constantly shifting, automakers are now being forced to make decisions in a highly uncertain environment. International trade in the auto industry is no longer guided purely by efficiency or economics. It has become a high-stakes political game, where diplomatic relationships often outweigh market logic. For consumers, the consequences are clear. Every tariff adjustment or policy change can lead to higher prices, fewer vehicle options, or longer wait times. Taxes on imported metals and parts are passed directly into the final cost of a car. While automakers are doing what they can to absorb some of the pressure, it's becoming increasingly difficult. Interest rates remain high, making borrowing more expensive, and when combined with the added weight of tariffs, many vehicles are drifting out of reach for average buyers. In response, car manufacturers are scrambling to adapt. Some are investing in new production facilities within the US. Others are exploring greater use of recycled materials to reduce reliance on imports. Many are working to diversify their supply chains, forming partnerships with new countries and suppliers. But these solutions take time. Rebuilding or reconfiguring supply chains that have been developed over decades isn't something that can be accomplished in a few months. As a result, even the badge on a car now carries political weight. A German luxury car, a Japanese hybrid, or even an American-made pickup truck assembled with foreign parts, all are affected differently, depending more on international trade negotiations than on engineering or design. Further complicating the picture are new investigations under Section 232, now extending into other sectors like polysilicon and wind turbines. This means the sense of uncertainty hanging over the auto industry may only deepen. Removing some tariffs may offer short-term relief, but it also highlights a more uncomfortable reality. American industry is still deeply reliant on a consistent, uninterrupted flow of imported raw materials. These temporary exemptions might buy time, but they won't change the fundamentals. Unless the US can significantly expand its own capacity to mine, refine, and manufacture key materials, the foundation of the auto sector remains fragile. That fragility will become more obvious in car showrooms. Vehicles tied to supply chains in countries favored by Washington's trade policy may hold their prices more steadily. Those connected to suppliers facing heavy tariffs will see more dramatic price swings. For consumers, three major factors will shape the market: access to critical components, the success of government trade negotiations, and how quickly domestic production infrastructure can be scaled up to close the gap. If all three align, prices could stabilize and availability may improve. But if they don't, the market could face reduced model availability, longer wait lists, and soaring prices that push more buyers to the sidelines. In this climate, automakers that combine strong technology with savvy diplomatic strategy will be best positioned to succeed. The broader question now is what lies ahead. Will easing tariffs actually give the auto industry time to adjust, or are they just delaying the inevitable? Will buyers continue accepting higher prices, or will demand begin to weaken as the economy cools? And as Washington keeps rewriting the rules of trade, will its global partners continue to play along? Or is a new round of trade conflicts just over the horizon? From this point, attention turns to Russia. For more than 20 years, Vladimir Putin cultivated the image of a strong, self-reliant nation that could withstand any outside pressure. Russian oligarchs showcased their wealth on the international stage, and the country's vast oil and gas revenues filled government coffers, reinforcing a narrative of strength and resilience both at home and abroad. But that image is now crumbling, and the cracks are becoming impossible to hide. Behind the patriotic slogans and state-controlled media, Russia's economy is in steep decline. Everyday life shows clear signs of recession. Grocery store shelves are growing emptier. Prices rise week after week. The ruble continues to lose value. Families are being forced to stretch meals and make do with lower wages, while shortages extend from major cities to remote towns. Jobs are disappearing. Incomes are shrinking. The social contract that once offered a sense of stability is rapidly breaking down. Yet billions of rubles are still being funneled into the military effort, while most citizens remain silent publicly, letting their frustration grow quietly behind closed doors. The toll isn't just economic, it's human. The war has taken an entire generation of young Russians, sending them from cities and villages into combat zones. Millions more have left the country, either to avoid being drafted or to escape a collapsing economy. As a result, Russia is rapidly losing both its people and its wealth. Even government forecasts admit that by 2030, the labor force could shrink by nearly 11 million workers. Factories are struggling to stay open, and labor shortages are worsening across many industries. Immigration has done little to fill the gap, leaving major holes in the country's industrial output. In this fragile context, Putin continues to rely heavily on energy exports, the core of his power structure for decades. But even this is under threat. Drone attacks have damaged refineries and slashed more than 13% of refining capacity. Production is falling, reserves are being drained, and former customers are working hard to reduce their dependence on Russian oil and gas. Russia's status as a global energy superpower is fading, and with it, much of the influence the Kremlin once held. What's more alarming isn't just sanctions or declining sales. It's the quiet distancing of a partner once seen as Russia's economic lifeline, China. For years, China provided Russia with an alternative to the West, a major buyer, a financial partner, and a geopolitical ally. But that relationship is now weakening. Chinese banks, wary of secondary sanctions, are cutting ties. Transactions that once flowed freely are now stalled. Deals are being cancelled. Russian firms are being locked out of financial systems they once relied on. Even smaller regional banks in China are stepping back. This marks a complete reversal from earlier promises of limitless cooperation. What remains of the Russia-China partnership now survives only through risky workarounds, routing funds through layers of intermediaries, using opaque payment systems that come with high costs and even higher risks. For Moscow, it's an embarrassment that can no longer be concealed. A relationship once hailed as unbreakable has been reduced to fragile stopgaps and improvised solutions. And the consequences go far beyond inconvenience. These breakdowns are cutting deeper into an economy already struggling to stay afloat. Inside the Kremlin, financial indicators are starting to lose relevance. The defense budget has ballooned to unsustainable levels, draining resources faster than they can be replenished. Meanwhile, revenue from oil and gas, once Russia's economic lifeline, has sharply declined, with buyers demanding steep discounts. Foreign currency reserves are vanishing quickly, creating dangerous gaps in government spending. Every ruble funneled into tanks and missiles means one less ruble for hospitals, schools, and essential infrastructure. At the same time, soaring interest rates are choking both businesses and everyday families. Companies are holding off on investments, households are cutting back, and economic forecasts are pointing to an even deeper recession. Economists now describe Russia's outlook as a narrowing corridor. Every possible path forward comes with serious pain. Raise taxes, and businesses could collapse. Print more money, and inflation could spiral out of control. Cut public spending, and millions will face worsening poverty. With Chinese banks continuing to pull away, that narrowing corridor is closing even faster, leaving the Kremlin with fewer and fewer lifelines. The real question is, how long can these cracks be hidden before the entire system gives way? Will this risky strategy ultimately bring the victory the Kremlin hopes for? Or will it end in financial collapse and political isolation?